A very pleasant good day to all of our friends or viewers. We want to welcome you to another marriage encounter. We are here to discuss, to share issues relating to marriage. We have been for the last few weeks talking about values, and we are discussing a very important value this week, the value called holiness. And I know that if you were not with us last week, you would immediately think holiness is a value for marriage. Well, we had an interesting discussion last week, and we're going to pick it up from there. Before we do so, Dr. Braithwaite will lead us in a word of prayer.
Let's pray, everyone. Father, we are thankful for another wonderful opportunity as we share on Marriage Encounter. We're thankful, God, for the moments that we've spent as persons have listened, have shared their own ideas with us and questions. And God, we pray that those who are listening today will once again be blessed. May you allow today's session to be a blessing to all in Jesus' name.
Amen.
Amen.
Doc, I think one thing that everybody would agree with is that if everybody and every marriage was really holy, then we wouldn't have any issues.
We wouldn't have any issues at all. And, you know, it's an interesting quality, as you mentioned, because it kind of gives a certain impression, but we realize it's much deeper than what you might think on the surface.
Yeah, that's right. So when we're talking about holiness as a value for marriage, we're not suggesting that all you do in your marriage is to sing hymns and read psalms.
Absolutely not.
That's not the idea. But the principle of holiness is important because it takes us back to God. It takes us back to God. It takes us to the understanding and awareness that we were made by Him.
Right.
And that calls for accountability.
Yes.
That says that we are not our own, that we should act responsibly. If you are working for somebody, you know, you may even be in charge of the office, but it's not your office. And so your decisions that you make, your functions that you engage in from day to day would be done with the awareness that you have to give an account.
That's right. That's right.
And to some extent, when we talk about holiness as a virtue, is the recognition that I am accountable to a higher power.
Yeah.
Yes.
And in the context of marriage, you think about holiness, you think about that accountability to your marital partner. You think about the fact that you're not a life unto yourself anymore. I like to tell people that when you decide to get married, it's not that somebody put the gun to your head and said, if you don't marry me, I'm gonna shoot you. You've made the decision to share your life with somebody else. And in making that choice, in making that decision, you now determine, listen, I am going to be accountable to that person. I'm going to be devoted to that person.
Yes, that's right. And it can be an exciting journey. In fact, that's why we're here in Marriage Encounter. To let you know that the experience, of being married and establishing strong values for your relationship will result in you having a very meaningful relationship.
Correct.
But guess what? You need to get your spouse in on listening to these very important points that we're sharing. You should not listen alone. You may listen alone now, but you, at least because your spouse may not be available, you should also be able to get your spouse to come and replay. You can always go to Second Advent radio and replay the videos. You can also go to
SLC Adventist.
SLC Adventist.
Yes, on YouTube.
On YouTube and replay the videos.
Yes.
So that your spouse can share in on important information.
That's right. Well, Doc, we were talking the last time in relationship to this value and holiness. We spoke to the fact that if every marriage were holy, some things would be present. And we spoke about confession and ownership of problems in each individual. So we acknowledge that if you are devoted, you're committed to your relationship, you're accountable to each other, that whenever you have a problem, you'll be willing to confess and own up. Right? That's one of the principles of holiness. The second one was you'd have a relentless drive towards growth. And I think we spent quite a bit of time here because we recognize that as you grow in your relationship, as you move along in your relationship, you want to grow, you want to develop. You don't want to stay at the same place as you as you learn to communicate, you want to grow in your communication journey. You want to grow in your journey in matters of resolving conflict. You want to grow in your journey as you deal with financial matters. And the way to grow is to read, to edify yourself as an individual and as a couple. So both persons taking this journey together. One of the components of holiness is also growing and developing together. And then finally, last week we looked at giving up everything that gets in the way of love. Doc, I don't know if you remember that part of our discussion, but we did say we want to give up anything that gets in the way of love.
And we spoke about this last week, but I think it's worth just doing a quick review on this, Doc, because I may have some personal habits that may be good for me when I was single. There are lots of young men who like to play some games, maybe Nintendo, maybe Flight Simulator, or whatever the game may be. Yeah. And they consume most of their nighttime hours doing that. When you get married and you still have that affinity towards your games, you may discover that your spouse begins to complain.
That's right.
And your spouse may tell you, make a choice.
Right.
You want to be married to the PlayStation or you want to be married to me. And we're talking about giving up anything that will stand in the way of love. Sometimes you have to make some sacrifices. Now, the interesting thing here, Doc, is that you're not necessarily giving up something because it is bad in itself, because it is evil, but because it is standing in the way of love.
Yeah, and it's getting in the way, standing in the way, getting in the way of the ability of the couple to really share and to express love and to grow together in love. So, those nighttime hours that an individual may be spending on a video game, a flight simulator, whatever the case may be, is at least a portion of that time could have been time used to grow your relationship, to spend some quality time together. And if your spouse is complaining, it then suggests that there is a problem. And it could be anything. I mean, for some people it's television, it's watching Netflix. A person may spend hours and hours watching some type of series on Netflix, or just on YouTube, or spending time with some other persons, other family members, or spending an inordinate amount of time doing work-related things while you're at home. Any of these things can be things that can get in the way of developing and growing your love relationship.
I wanted to highlight one other example. In-laws. I may be very connected to my mother.
Yes.
And I may have been my mother's favorite child, and I always check things with her, and never make a decision without her inputs and that kind of thing. And now I'm married, and I want to continue that. And so everything, I consult my mother, what do you think about this? And pretty soon my spouse says, hold on, you're married, you forget.
Exactly.
And that, I'm specific with this example, Doc, because sometimes that creates a real challenge.
Difficulties,
where there is an in-law tension, not that your spouse does not like your in-law, but your spouse may say, listen, my in-law is taking center stage in this relationship. Some spouses say, I feel as though I'm the third person in this marriage.
Right.
And they may say, we need to sit down and discuss this because, I'm supposed to be center stage, not your mother or your father or whoever it is.
Yeah, and I mean, it can be maybe a little subtle if you don't recognize it, and it's something that you really need to identify and recognize. Because, for instance, you may be consulting with your spouse on something. Your spouse says, okay, this is my suggestion and so forth and so on, and you leave the conversation, and later you come back and say, well, your spouse comes and says, but I thought we said we were going to do so and so, and you say, well, I spoke to mommy about it and mommy suggested this, and you did it that way, and that becomes sort of the normal practice, and obviously, as you indicated, Doc, that becomes very uncomfortable. If you're in a marriage, you would think that the person you consult with is your spouse, not your father, not your father or your mother. And so those types of realities are, they are real. Those things are real. It happens in real life. And what we're suggesting is you don't want that to get in the way of the development of your relationship, because at the end of the day, it's you and your spouse, and not your mother and your spouse, or your father and your spouse.
And we're not saying that you should be disrespectful to your parents.
No, absolutely
We're not saying that you must put them on the back burner necessarily.
No.
We're saying you have to establish priority. For some people, every time a family member calls, you just stop what you're doing and you have to go. And your spouse may say to you, wait, isn't there something called later? I'm busy now. We have this plan. We are going to the beach this afternoon. And all of a sudden, your sister or your mother calls and you can't go to
everything
the beach
is cancelled,
anymore. And so that, and your spouse may say, listen, this is standing in the way of love. This is standing in the way of our relationship. You're going to have to make a choice here. And we're saying when holiness is a value, you understand what it means and you practice giving up those things that are standing in the way of the development of your relationship.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, I guess we could go on and on with various examples. I think the principle is established, though, that, anything that sort of gets in the way of the development of your relationship can be problematic. And you need to look at it. The couple needs to come together and look at this thing and determine, is this problematic? And so think about it, and then let's determine as a couple, how can we proceed?
I want to introduce another one here, Doc, and this is very interesting. It sounds similar, but I think it's deeper. You're not only giving up, when holiness is present, you're not just giving up everything that stands in the way of love, but you're giving up everything that gets in the way of truth.
All right, okay.
Everything that gets in the way of truth.
Right.
Now, truth is an interesting principle. Yeah, because another synonym people may want to use is honesty.
Yes.
You are going to be forthright with explaining, with saying, with self-disclosing.
Yes.
Anything that stands in the way of truth. So I have a friend at work that I like. I enjoy her company.
Right.
And my spouse is beginning to get a little uneasy, and my spouse may even say, listen, this is not good, you're going to do. But I don't want to
break
it off.
Yeah.
So I begin to explain things away. Where were you? Why didn't you get home on time?
Right.
Now maybe the young lady asked me to take her to the supermarket.
Right.
And I don't want my wife to know that. So I come up with something and I say, I had to make an errand.
Right.
That's
not detailed, just an errand.
Detailed,
Yeah.
There is something there that is getting in the way of truth.
Right. And from the moment that you recognize that you're now manipulating your scenarios so that it wouldn't bring any additional maybe concern to your spouse, is that moment that you realize something isn't quite right.
That's right.
All right, because we talk about truth. We talk about, as theologians, we talk about the sin of omission and the sin of commission, right?
Correct.
So we're talking about the fact that you gave information, but you omitted some of the information. So the information you gave wasn't really an outright lie, but it's a lie because you omitted. Where were you? I went to run an errand. You didn't say who you went to run that errand with or for. And so you are now withholding information. And as you mentioned, that is exactly what we're talking about when we say, don't let anything get in the way of truth. You must be open, you must be forthright with information, even if it means that you have to answer some questions that you may not be quite prepared to answer, but you need to be honest about the situation. I think that's the important thing.
Earlier I said it's deep.
Yes.
Because what this calls for is some self-evaluation.
Yes.
What practices am I engaged in that would lead me to misrepresent the truth?
Yes.
Because I don't want to be found out, how is this impacting my relationship at the end of the day? These are serious questions that we must consider.
Correct.
Because if I am hiding something from my spouse, that says something is wrong.
Right. Yeah.
It says I'm not acting holy.
Correct. Correct.
You know?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and therefore I'm being unfaithful to this value.
Yes.
So I have to make adjustments accordingly.
Yeah. And that's perfectly correct. I mean, as we said, that value of holiness may sometimes kind of throw you off, but it is so deep in our understanding as we discuss it, and as we've been discussing it since last week, that ability to remain committed and devoted in the context of your relationship and doing what is best for the relationship at all times. In this context, being forthright, being honest, being truthful, to the point where you are willing to, allow yourself to be examined, to be questioned, and you're willing also to give the correct responses. Correct answers.
I think holiness forces us, guides us to make our marriages priority.
Yes.
Because I am not going to be acting selfishly. A lot of times in a relationship, when people look out for their own interest, then they get into trouble.
That's
they
correct.
ignore the other person.
That's
they may
correct.
begin to elevate pleasure over the discipline of commitment, for example. And holiness suggests that your relationship, the health of your relationship, the success of your relationship takes priority over your own personal feelings. And that's the good thing about holiness. So now it is interfering with the way I am acting. Because when I have to make a decision, I'm not just making a decision that's going to impact me and how I feel and maybe my temporary happiness. I'm going to make a decision that will be for the ultimate good of my relationship. My behavior is going to be one that will strengthen my relationship and make my marriage more meaningful.
I just want just to reiterate something you said, because you said when you're considering your marriage, you're making decisions that will benefit the relationship, and you place those decisions as a priority over decisions that will benefit you personally. I don't know if you want to just highlight or unpack that a little more, because that to me that's pretty deep. You are, as an individual, you have your own preferences, but you're not married, and
Correct.
you're saying, okay, I'm prioritizing my decisions based on my marriage as opposed to my personal gain and benefit. How does that work?
So I'm glad you took us back there.
Yeah.
Because I may like sports cars. Sports cars. And I may have this dream of buying this really expensive sports car with latest technology and gadgets and all the rest of it and so on. But if I make that purchase to satisfy my own interests, it may interfere with my spouse completing her degree that she has been yearning to complete all the time. And in the long run of things, it's going to put us in a position where we can earn more ultimately. I must be willing to say, I'm going to sacrifice personal gratification for the success of the relationship.
But Pastor, that dream car is something I've wanted all of my life. I have been pushing for it, saving for it. Yes, I decided to get married. Why does that have to interfere with my dream?
Well, I think you have to ask yourself.
Why can't I continue to do, the things that I want to do, even if it's going to interfere with,
Well, and this is where priority comes in, right? What will the acquisition of that vehicle do to your marriage?
Right.
How will it make your spouse feel? Will it make your spouse feel that you're selfish, that you're not taking her interest into consideration? Will it make your spouse feel that, once you are satisfied, then who cares? So these are things we have to consider in the relationship. There are times, Doc, when we have to make decisions. You want to go on a trip, but your spouse gets sick. You could say, your mommy can come and stay with you, and you go about your business, and then your spouse may be thinking, how uncaring, because you're leaving me here sick, rather than canceling the trip, to be present, to be available for your spouse. So these things are what we're talking about here.
It's interesting because, I've heard persons say, since I got married to this person, it's like my whole life has been set back. Some of the things that I want to accomplish I can't accomplish them because I don't feel like this person is, or it's like as though the person has now become a burden on their relationship. I mean, you can have, scenarios where persons are set back for different reasons, but I'm thinking in the context of where it's simply that you had some dreams and some desires, but you can't accomplish them maybe as quickly because you have somebody else with you who you have to now share your resources with. And if you don't feel like you are in a place where you're willing to share your resources with somebody else, then maybe you should not have chosen to get married.
Yeah, I'm thinking that individual was shortchanged a bit in the marital preparation stage. Or they did not self-disclose, which is, again, why truth is so important.
Important, yeah, self-disclosure.
Because, you don't want to end up getting married under duress.
Correct.
If
correct.
you're not disclosing. So here is the point, Doc. In my preparation for marriage, I ought to be able to say to the young lady that I'm getting married to, these are my aspirations, these are my goals, these are the things I want to accomplish in life. How do they line up with what she wants to accomplish? And what are we going to take from there to say, okay, yeah, you always had a dream to do so and so, but now you're getting married to me. We're going to have to put that aside, and we're going to focus on this. Those kinds of things, which is why marital preparation is so very important.
Very important.
Because if we don't disclose these things when we're getting married,
Yes.
and you go ahead and get married and then say, wait, you know how long I've been planning for this car?
Right.
I'm not going to let you prevent me from doing it now. And your spouse may think, that is very insensitive.
That's insensitive, absolutely. So yeah, very, very important value, very important consideration as we consider the value of holiness, surrendering everything that gets in the way of truth. And we're going to look at this final one for this week, Doc, a purity of heart where nothing toxic is allowed to grow.
Now, that's big. I don't know if we can finish that this week. Toxicity is a major thing. So you're saying that holiness is going to force me
Yes.
to surrender everything so that my heart becomes fertile ground for the development of that which is pure and lovely, but nothing toxic.
Nothing toxic, yeah. And I love this value personally. I love this aspect of holiness because that's one of the things that I really cherish, that relationships ought not to breed toxicity.
So I was just going to ask you, why then, you encounter some relationships over the years,
yes.
and all that comes out is toxicity.
Yeah.
You say that relationship is toxic. And sometimes people become physically abusive. They seem not to like each other.
That's right.
So where did that come from?
Well, I think one of the places I would suggest, and foundational to the success of any relationship, Doc, is the ability to communicate, number one, and also to resolve conflicts. And I think if persons do not possess those skills, then there's a high tendency for it to move towards that holisty of toxicity. And as you said, time may be so short. But if we just talk about it a little bit, if you are in a relationship where you can't express things that you're not appreciative of, and you're not able to do that in a way that brings about resolution, then you can determine that going forward, persons are going to have what we would call grouses. They're going to have issues that remain unresolved, and as a result of that, you will have the development of tensions that can grow into all of the things that you mentioned a while ago, from toxic words to toxic behavior.
So I'm hearing here that if I am now choosing holiness as a value, I have to be willing to engage in those behaviors that will help my marriage to develop, because I may need to learn proper communication skills.
Correct. Yes.
Right?
Yes.
I may need to learn patience.
Correct.
Some people really struggle with this virtue called patience.
Patience, yeah.
And when they get angry, they say things that they don't mean.
That's right.
They say things that
They're
can
toxic.
be exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it means that I have to do a lot of internal work, Doc.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, it's hugely important, and I think in our culture as well, it's someone once said that in the culture of the Caribbean, in many ways, we live in a kind of a shame culture where we like to take and look at the negatives and highlight those negatives, and in the context of a relationship, bringing the negatives and not resolving the issues can lead persons to attempt to express themselves in ways that are not very healthy. I would also like to just go back a bit and ask persons, how, in your experience, how have you learned to address issues where you're not comfortable? How have you learned to address disputes? What has been your history in terms of in your own home? How have you seen your family members, relatives, and loved ones address disputes? In the society that we came from, Pastor, children would be at preschool playing or at school playing, and they get into a little argument and they have their little push around and so forth. Today, people resolve conflicts by using weapons, and that is a part of our cultural problem, even in the context of our marriages, where people do not know how to resolve conflicts without using toxic language,
Yeah, so Doc, if I am getting married, it may be useful for me to consider, and for my spouse, likewise, my spouse to be to consider, my history.
Yes, very much so.
You mentioned just now, one of the questions, what methodology did we use in my family of origin to resolve conflicts?
Yes, yes.
How did we deal with hard issues?
Yes.
Some persons just leave the hard issues. They never address it.
Never address it, yeah.
Some people become defensive.
Yes.
And these things are going to, these are the things that shape our own ideologies and methodologies in terms of how we now will relate to issues when they arise in our relationships.
That is correct.
And if we're talking about doing something, our time is almost up.
Yep.
We're going to continue with this discussion next week. But if we're talking about something that is going to reduce the level of toxicity in our relationship, I think we have to be very consciously aware of who we are. We're talking about emotional intelligence and a whole lot of things.
That's right. That's right.
But we're going to pick it up right from there next week.
Yes, sir.
Because our time is just about up.
Gone.
So, friends, if you are enjoying this discussion, be sure to join us next week. Or send us a note, better still, to say how meaningful this has been to you. Our mailing address is marriageencounter@slcadventist.org. That is Marriage Encounter, all one word, marriageencounter@slcadventist.org. Please remember that we have a rebroadcast of this evening at 6:30 and again on Saturday afternoon at 2 p.m. Until next week, same time, may God's richest blessings be yours.